Last night, the Democratic Party was able to squeak out a win against Republican Roy Moore. Now, I'm going to go over one lesson here that I think the Democratic Party should win or should learn from last night, and one lesson that some people are taking away from this that the Democratic Party shouldn't really listen to. So, to help with my arguments, I'm going to first show you some data from the exit polls last night about who voted. So when looking at last night's voters by race and sex, it's clear that black men and especially black women is what handed Doug Jones the win. And this is in a state where African Americans make up 26% of the population, but last night they made up 29% of the electorate, meaning that without black voters, Doug Jones wouldn't have come anywhere close to defeating Roy Moore. And now combine that with this exit poll question that asked, were the sexual misconduct allegations against Moore a factor? And 60% of people said that it was a factor in their vote, and 68% of those 60% voted for Jones. So clearly, Roy Moore's past behavior did have a big effect in actually bringing out voters to come and vote for Jones, meaning that the Democratic Party platform alone is not really what drove this election. So I think the obvious lesson here is that the Democratic Party needs to do more to reach out to black voters, and especially black women, who are the most loyal voting bloc for the Democrats. Now, as somebody who is a white guy, I try not to tell black voters what they should ask for in a candidate. But writer Briahna Joy Gray is a black woman who's written extensively about how the progressive message fits into this agenda. Bernie Sanders' anti-poverty initiatives would disproportionately aid black women, as 46% of those in poverty are black families headed by single black women. Sanders famously had to fight the Democratic establishment to sign on to raising minimum wage to $15 an hour. And while Sanders might reasonably be faulted for not highlighting the extent to which his agenda disproportionately helps specific identity groups, women comprise the majority of minimum wage workers. And black women, who make up 6% of the population, comprise 23% of minimum wage workers. Sanders became active in the civil rights movement in his teens and continued to advocate for social justice causes throughout his career, including giving an impassioned congressional speech against precisely those draconian provisions of the crime bill the Clintons supported, demonizing black children as super predators in their effort to do so. Now, I mentioned Sanders' history in the civil rights movement in addition to issues of economic justice because I think this combination is what could lead to potential wins for Democrats. So, just taking Doug Jones as an example, while Jones's platform doesn't really seem all that inspiring, he did have a history as a prosecutor of prosecuting white supremacists. So I think that did help boost his vote with African Americans. And on top of that, I think it's important to not put too much emphasis on the identity of the candidate, as Briahna Joy Gray points out here. It's strange that we're at the point where this needs to be said. A black politician is not necessarily the best politician to promote black interests, and a female politician will not necessarily serve women's interests better than a man would. Race produces a set of lived experiences that inform our political perspective, but identity cannot be used as a mitigating factor for political shortcomings. A glance at the unusually diverse 2016 Republican primary field illustrates as much. If we believe that a political candidate's identity overrides their substantive beliefs and policy prescriptions, then a Ben Carson/Carly Fiorina ticket would have been a progressive dream. Okay, so I think that sums it up pretty well. The only thing that I would add is that if there was a hypothetical matchup between two Democratic opponents and they both had the same positions in terms of policy and have a history of supporting those policies, but one is a person of color or a woman and the other one is a white man, I do think it makes sense to support the one that is the person of color or the woman. And that's because of the lived experience that they have being that person, as opposed to being a white man that already has quite a lot of representation in Congress. So while identity is important, I think policy, it makes sense that policy is the most important factor. And then if everything's the same, identity comes next. So that's how I feel about that issue. And I think it's clear the Democratic Party should do more to appeal to black voters. Now, the thing that I think Democrats should not learn from this election is summed up in this tweet. Dear Senator Sanders, tonight is an example of what a strong centrist Democrat brings to the country. Wins. Why? Because they appeal to all Americans, not just one small segment. So I find this tweet hilarious because how does this person explain all the losses the Democratic Party faced over the last 8 years while running centrists? So no, the lesson here is to not run more centrist. And in fact, Doug Jones only won by a percentage point. So if they had actually run a progressive who was progressive on the economic issues, there may have actually been a larger victory for the Democratic Party. But yeah, a 1% win by a moderate Democrat does not mean run more moderates. And on top of that, we have the demographics of people that actually support Bernie Sanders, and his largest supporting base is African Americans at 73%, with white people only supporting him with 52%. So if the lesson was to run more moderates, then why is Bernie pulling in these sorts of numbers, including 80% of support from Democrats as a whole? But I'm also not even sure that this Twitter account is a real person because of tweets like this. A lot of butthurt Senator Sanders people, they just can't accept centrists are what Americans want. So happy tonight. So based on this person's odd tweeting habits and their standard Barack Obama profile picture and their name I Shall Resist, I tend to think this is not a real person, and that this enthusiasm for centrists doesn't really exist, because when progressives talk about the candidates that we support, we mention the actual policies that they're pushing, and we aren't just generally excited about progressives. There are a reason we are excited about them, and it's because of the policies that they intend to push and try and implement once they're actually elected. So yeah, don't put any stock in the idea that the Democratic Party should run more centrist, because that's what's caused them to lose all the seats that they've lost.